Britain's most compelling commentator from Reasoned UK, a popular Conservative channel. It's my pal and yours, Darren Grimes. Hi, Darren.
Hi, Mark.
Great to have you on the show. How are things with you? Are you enjoying your newfound freedom as you drink a lemonade in sub-zero temperatures?
Do you know, my heart, I've been listening to the show and my heart absolutely breaks for those who have thought, right, our pubs can at least open outside. We can get punters in outside. And then, of course, I don't know what it's like in London, but for a week, an entire week here, it's just going to rain and rain and rain. My heart absolutely goes out to all of those landlords who have just completely broken. And actually, all of those, Mark, let's not forget, thousands of them that work in the hospitality industry whose jobs are now at risk because pubs can't stay open.
Well, absolutely. One particular leading light in the world of hospitality tweeted yesterday, "We are not open." And what he means by that is, yes, we are nominally open, but this is not a business model.
Exactly.
And it won't even be a business model on the 17th of May. UK hospitality have said that if all COVID restrictions are not lifted after the 21st of June, if we have social distancing in the summer, well, then many hospitality businesses won't survive. Distancing has to go.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. No, totally. It's utterly, I mean, given that yesterday, right, one COVID death, one death, and yet we're talking about the loss of the jobs of thousands and thousands of people in this country. And by the way, if you get pushed into poverty, financial and mental misery, then you are more likely to find yourself in dire straits, of course, economically. Oh, that's obvious. But your life chances are also diminished. Your health is also diminished. So we're actually risking the health of the nation, not just the livelihoods of the nation, by continuing this farce. We've waited, right? You and I have been waxing lyrical about this. We said, right, fine, let's wait until we vaccinate the vulnerable. Let's do that. The vaccine rollout scheme, that's phenomenal. Of course, we celebrate that. I'm sure I speak for you as well, Mark.
Yeah.
But now that we've done that, now that we've actually achieved that laudable aim, what are we doing now? This is just insanity.
Well, it starts to look criminal.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because if you can't justify the measures, then it's willful damage.
Well, absolutely. I tweeted this earlier, actually. I'm talking about my vote on Thursday. I am going to still vote for the Conservative Party, but I tell you what, Mark, I'll be holding me nose whilst I do it.
Indeed so. Let's talk about the very talented author and philosopher Malcolm Gladwell. This is the guy that wrote a book about that theory that you need to do something for 10,000 hours before you become proficient at it. He also wrote The Tipping Point, and he's the person that coined that phrase, the tipping point. He's quite the cultural iconoclast, isn't he? I'm a huge fan of his, actually. And he has said cancel culture is rife because a whole generation has been raised without the Christian ethic of forgiveness.
Exactly. Now, I know many of your listeners might be thinking, oh, here we go, Mark's got the God Squad on tonight. What a treat. But hear us out. I've actually
You're a lay preacher, aren't you, by the way?
Oh, no, not quite, thank goodness. But I mean, I've actually said this on your Drive Time show before, Mark. I'm an Anglican. I don't know how I still am, to be honest. I'm a Christian. I go to church. I consider myself to be a member of the Church of England. And we Anglicans were the biggest Leave voting bloc in the country. Not many people know that, but you wouldn't, of course, if you just listened exclusively to bishops and archbishops of the church. But putting all that to one side, I think there's something to be said for the idea that we're all forgiving sinners, which is something that we used to believe as a nation across the board. And the idea that we let he who is without sin cast the first stone. And you sort of remember that our shared humanity by consuming, rich or poor, one and all, the blood and indeed the body of Christ, those fundamental parts, key tenets of the Christian faith. Now, it was easier back then, I think, to remember that we all make mistakes, that in life there are Judases just as much as there are Johns. But I think in the not too distant future, there's going to be a real crisis of confidence in what we've replaced Christianity with. The sort of religions of woke, the religions of cancel culture, the religions of green, the religions of, I don't know, even the NHS to a certain extent has become a sort of the church of the nation.
And identity politics, of course.
Absolutely. And it's become a sort of competition. Our culture's become a competition of likes and retweets. And don't get me wrong, I'm guilty of that myself. Instead of sharing together a sort of community and moral values in which you can, I don't know, order a hookup as easily as you can a Chinese takeaway in today's day and age. But all of these things, I read his article, the article in the Times, and it rang true with me. I did actually read it and think, I do recognize that. And I do think in the future, we're going to look back and think, oh, goodness gracious me, we have lost an awful lot.
You can order a hookup as easily as a Chinese takeaway. You'll have to explain that one to me after the show, perhaps. Darren, it's interesting, isn't it? Because I don't think this is unique and exclusive to Christianity. I think most of the world's great faiths profess the idea that we are insignificant, that we are temporary, that we're humble, that there is a higher power. So whether it's Judaism or Islam or Christianity or any number of other ethical codes, it's all about, thinking about other people and being humble and forgiving. So you could argue that what we're missing, therefore, is across the board spirituality.
Yeah, no, I think so. Well, it depends what you mean by spirituality, right? Because I guess many of them would argue that they're incredibly spiritual when they, I don't know, bring out the incense burners whenever they hear Mark Dolan or Darren Grimes on the telly. But, this, I think you're absolutely right. There have been so many occasions where I see things online from people just jumping to conclusions about what something has said. And actually, 9 times out of 10, Mark, whenever I've had someone say something about me online, whenever I have asked them to repeat that or do they want to discuss that in person, the person is rarely ever willing to actually engage with you or have that conversation in person or say something, repeat something that they've said online. And I think this sort of medium of the internet has meant that we feel removed from those who we are tweeting or talking about online and forget that we are all at the end of the day humans. And I think that works on both the left and the right. I think we're all guilty of it. So I'm always willing to listen to those, I think, especially eminent authors who want to sort of bring us back to remembering those laudable aims and values.
A regular guest on the show is the comedian Nick Dixon, who is a practicing Christian, Darren. And he said that he's concerned, actually. He feels that the leadership of his church is actually now also dominated by a woke ideology. Is that a concern of yours?
Yeah, it is a concern of mine. It absolutely is. And it brings us on to the next story, actually. But talking about the sort of statue reviews, talking about diversity quotas, talking about all these things. Diversity quotas. Mark, before long, there won't be anyone left in the Church of England. Never mind diversity quotas. We've got to get bums on seats. Never mind sort of, I don't know, a rainbow coalition in the Church of England. This stuff is absolutely farcical. It's utterly cartoon. So, yes, I would agree wholeheartedly that this sort of the upper echelons of the church have got their priorities well and truly wrong. And especially during I've said this to you before, especially during the coronavirus pandemic when people have needed spiritual guidance and direction as we all go doolally by being locked away indoors for nigh on 12 months. We've needed our spiritual leaders. We've needed our national church. And I'm afraid they've been left with sorely wanting.
Well, yeah, to speak up on the impact of lockdowns.
Exactly. I totally agree with you. I couldn't agree with you more.
No
but
opposition.
Of course, anyone that argues against that, Mark, is a denier. We are bad people. We are selfish. We hate granny. That's the sort of stuff that we're met with. Yeah. That's the sort of
I think locking people up for a year and throwing away the key is hardly a Christian thing to do, but that's just my opinion. Darren, let's talk about the University of Liverpool. I'm sure it's an excellent seat of education, but tell us more.
Yeah, so there's a student accommodation block, or there was a student accommodation block named Gladstone Hall after William Gladstone, former Prime Minister. And a group of students and activists have digged through the archives, gone trawling through with that sort of modern tradition of looking to cancel someone by things that they've said and going through the archives like an archaeologist would. And they've discovered that Gladstone's dad owned slaves and he was paid financial compensation after the abolition of slavery. Now, were I a student at the University of Liverpool, Mark, I reckon I'd be rather miffed that the union, instead of discussing the cost of living for students, instead of discussing the fact that students are paying almost 10 grand a year for courses that they've barely been a part of, they've barely seen their own tutors or campuses, thanks to the lockdown restrictions, I'd want my union to be campaigning on those sorts of issues. But they're students, so perhaps we should be a bit more charitable. I've just been talking about forgiveness there. Let's forgive their self-indulgence over this issue, perhaps. And I guess their attempts to paint pound shop, their sort of pound shop cultural revolution here in little old Blighty. Let's forgive all of that. But what I won't forgive, what I sort of want to highlight to listeners tonight, is that no one will survive if we retroactively apply the moral standards of the day to the figures of the past. And especially when you consider that someone like Gladstone, this is the sort of path to madness and destruction. He personally opposed slavery over the course of his life. He gradually got to that position.
He named the abolition of slavery as one of the 10 greatest achievements of the previous 60 years.
Totally. And there we are, right? He worked through our trade policy, the United Kingdom's significant clout, to encourage the end of the slave trade. We sacrificed a lot to do that. And again, a really incredibly laudable thing that we should be so, so proud of. And he gave us the skeleton, if you like, for mass democracy in Britain, so that plebs like me could vote for Brexit. Perhaps I won't say that to the Remainers.
You are not. You're an elite voter. I think you should get a VIP vote. Yeah, I think Darren Grimes should have like 5 votes because you're so wise.
Do you know what? Nick Clegg said this. Nick Clegg said he said young people's votes should count twice. So there we are, Mark. I think you're onto something. Nick Clegg agrees. He made trade unions legal, Gladstone, not Nick Clegg, and he set the path to universal education for kids. Now,
so he should have actually more statues and more buildings named after him.
He sounds great, doesn't he? He's the sort of figure of our past that we should be celebrating. And I think it's been overused, this sort of line of the past 12 months because of this activism that seeks to destroy and denigrate. But there's a famous quote about those who don't remember their past being condemned to repeat their mistakes. And I think that's a really robust argument in defence of actually leaving figures like Gladstone for the good and the bad, although I would argue there's a hell of a lot more good than what he's achieved for working men and women of Britain than these privileged prats at universities that purport to represent all of us will ever achieve in their lives, Mark. I tell you that for free right now. So I say, let's remember forgiveness, even for statues, Mark, and leave them up and remember our past or be doomed to repeat the mistakes in our future.
Let's have one of these for you and for William Gladstone.
Oh.
Very, very well deserved. You can watch Darren Grimes on his fantastic channel. It's called Reasoned UK. It's on YouTube. He's got many, many subscribers, and you'll find out why if you give it a watch.